guess what I will do is let you know what I have been using controller-wise on Mortal Kombat 11 and why my controller settings are the way they are. I know a lot of people have been asking about this for quite a while, and it follows a format very similar to all the way back to Injustice 1. The nice thing is that this game gives you options for days, like more options for your controller than most fighting games ever have. I don't think that's specifically a good thing. I think a lot of these options are here because their input system in Mortal Kombat games, NRS games in general, has always been a bit wonky and kind of weird. And I think that their solution for it, instead of fixing it, is to make an option for it. Is to like, oh, we'll give you the option to sort of turn this on and off if you want, because some people are going to be used to it and it's a legacy thing now. Now we can't take it out, yada, yada, yada. And I'll explain exactly what that is and why it is. First and foremost, I am playing on a PlayStation 4 controller, but the big thing is that my PlayStation 4 controller's D-pad is not the same D-pad as a regular one. You'll listen to it. Hold on. Hear those clickings? The clicking noise is mechanical buttons. I'm gonna grab a regular PS4 controller. The regular buttons sound like this. They don't really respond or click, right? The thing you'll notice on a regular PS4 controller is this. The D-pad, the individual inputs are not individual. Like, each one of these buttons is actually held by a big circle pad underneath here. So when you press a button like this, you're actually moving the whole pad. See how the other buttons are moving when I do that? When I press right, the whole pad moves when you do that. It's the same thing if you press like down to down back. If I'm pressing down right here and I'm actually holding it in this direction, but I'm not actually pressing the back button, this will register as back on many games, including Mortal Kombat. It sucks. The D-pad on this seemed like it was going to be really good, but it's actually kind of bad. The nice part about this controller, which was made by Battle Beaver Customs, I'll put a link to it at some point so you guys can find it. But this thing, the buttons are individual. So you see when I press this button, nothing else moves. You're just getting a raw input on all this stuff. I can like hold it down as much as possible, and the other buttons aren't actually moving. So that's important. That's a thing that the PS4 Pro or the PS4 pads have a big issue with, is the fact that when you press a button on this thing, you're actually moving the whole pad. Look at that! I'm only pressing one button right now, and the whole pad is like jittering up and down. Ugh. That's not good. That is not good. Yeah, the Xbox is similar, but the PS4 is like 3 times worse. So it's an issue on both systems. So the nice part is that when you have this, if you want to get a back forward motion, you're just getting a back forward motion. You're getting nothing else. So that's the controller preference I use. You can get a mod to replace this that's really cheap for like 20 bucks if you want to do it yourself. But if you get the installation and they do it all themselves, I think this controller was 90, because you're buying a controller and then they're opening it and then adding it and then remanufacturing it and putting it back together and sending it to you. So if you want to get it with just that, you can if you want, or if you want to install it yourself, might be a bit better. But anyway, getting back to the game. So going down the input list, there's something that I've always changed on NRS games that is much different on this game by default. And that is where, let's go to default. The throw and interact button. I have always felt that the interact always feels a lot better on the L buttons instead of the R buttons. In fact, I like throw when I'm holding a controller to be on the same hand that I'm piloting the buttons, the character's attacks, because this isn't attacks. Like, this is all your movement. So I'm gonna keep like movement stuff over here. And instead, that means I prefer to do interact as L1 and throw as R1. And I believe at some point, and maybe Mortal Kombat 9, it might have been that way by default. I can't exactly tell you why I've always done it that way, but I much prefer my throw attack to be on the same hand that is doing all the other attacking, you know? So outside of like flip stance and block, yeah, block should be on R2. I personally think that should not change. And then flip stance is now actually tied to certain attacks, so you have to use the L buttons. It's all very odd. By default, this game Gives you a lot of different options on here that'll turn on and off and everything like that, and I'll tell you what they are and why they are. This is the most important one that they added to on this game. So this is not what I use, but I'll show you what I use. Long input window timing. You'll notice when you do certain attacks that have back-forward motions, like if you do forward 3, like a kick, and you can cancel that into Scorpion Spear or something like that. So you do his forward kick, and then you do back-forward 1 to do Spear. Sometimes, if this is under short, that'll be tough to do. The game will not accept the input of the cancel from you doing a forward 3 to Spear. If you want that window to be bigger, you make this either medium or long. That's pretty much what it boils down to. I've noticed that it can be more difficult to cancel into some special moves at times if you keep input window timing to short. So it can get a little difficult. But I appreciate this in terms of this game, because this has been an issue in some games where it's like you can buffer it in from a long time, you can buffer it in from sometimes. The fact that the game lets you choose, oh, how long am I allowed to sort of cancel an attack into an attack? I prefer long for most characters, but I have run into issues with Kung Lao where I mostly should be keeping it on medium. Because sometimes I'll do a down, pressing down to block, right? And then I'll press back, and I want to get my, like a back 1. I forget what back 1 might be. And I'll accidentally do spin, because the game has you under long input, and it's preserving that down and that back as being two things that are linked together in the input system. And it's like, oh, you want spin. No, I'm crouching and I'm walking backwards and I want to get my attack, or I'm sorry, I'm walking forwards because spin is down forward, and I want to get my attack, and it's giving me spin instead of forward 1. That is frustrating, and in that situation, you want to start turning this down, and it's a lot easier in some situations. So, but in general, I like it on long. I've kind of gotten used to it being on long input window timing and yada yada yada. Crushing blows held check. I do not recommend you turning this on if you're new to the game. Keep this off. This means that your crushing blows, if you fulfill the requirements, will activate automatically, and you're playing Garrus, and suddenly you just chop him in the neck and you get 40% damage. It was beautiful. You're having a great time. Crushing blow held check means that they will not automatically proc. So turning this on is good in situations where, oh, I don't want to use my crushing blow immediately. I want to be able to control when my crushing blow happens and how I use it. Okay, so that's good that that's there, because this is essentially like sort of, I'm just starting a character, I'm just gonna let crushing blows happen whenever, and then now I'm good at the character and I want to make sure to preserve that shit. I want to make sure I don't use my crushing blows because I need them to be preserved for a certain moment. And to make sure the crushing blow actually happens, all you do is just hold down the button. Like if you're throwing a person, you just hold down the throw button in the direction you threw. If you are, if it's an attack, or it's like you end an attack with 2, you just hold down that button, whatever the face button is, and the crushing blow will come out. And sometimes, even with crushing blow held check on, I still find myself doing them on accident sometimes. So this is just more control for your crushing blows. Release check is, and they actually call it this here, it's called negative edge. It's a term that came from the old Street Fighters, Street Fighter 2 days. And it's when you press a button down, and that counts as an input. But when you let up off the button, that also counts as an input too. And the way Mortal Kombat's input system has worked, I don't know why they haven't gotten rid of this yet, but I heavily encourage you to turn this off. I can understand that some people might like it for some reason, that it is something that some people will eventually do or utilize. And yes, some characters like Predator, with his certain cancels in Mortal Kombat X, actually this was really good. It helped out a lot with doing some Predator caster cancels in MKX. So in some situations, not bad, but my God, please turn it off. Like, absolutely. If you're just looking at your normal execution and why things are happening in weird directions, it's pretty much down to crushing release check being turned on. So please, negative edge, release check, just turn it off. It works a lot better in other games like Street Fighter. It still is used in a lot of other fighting games, but the way Mortal Kombat works, it doesn't feel right. So leave that off. Alternate controls are here as another Street Fighter thing, where the traditional input system for a Mortal Kombat game, and this has been this way since like MKX, I think, is, I'm thinking it might have been since Injustice 2. Down back, you know, for fireball back, down forward for fireball forward, back forward instead of half circle forward, stuff like that. Down up instead of like half circle up. This is for the folks that want to roll the inputs instead of pressing back forward and not having to do, you know, a rolled input. If you're a Street Fighter player and you're really used to that, this will feel extremely alien, like extremely alien. But for the sake of, if you're used to Mortal Kombat and your inputs are more reliable when it comes to your special moves, I recommend turning this off. Like, if you really want your fireballs, and yeah, you could still, you don't have to press down and then forward to get a fireball motion like an ice ball. You can still roll your finger. It's just that in a situation where, here's the big one, if you have a back forward mode like Scorpion Spear, back forward 1, they'll throw spear if you press back forward. If alternate control is set to on, you have to do back, down, forward, forward, meaning that you have to roll your input from one all the way to the other. Let me show you. So this is what it's like with it, with alternate control turned off. You just gotta go back, forward, press the button. If it's turned on, you have to roll your thumb from this to that. You have to go from one input all the way to the other. And that's more like Street Fighter, because Street Fighter doesn't have a lot of back forward motions unless they're charges. Most of the time they're half circles. And that's not specifically hard to do. A half circle isn't really tough to do. I usually accidentally do half circles when I'm just trying to do fireballs. But that's why alternate control is there, in case you're used to rolling your finger across the D-pad in order to get stuff. But in my personal opinion, I actually recommend you turn it off. I think this is not an option that's required for many characters, and I think it just feels good without it being on. Because I like the back forward motions in this game. Input shortcuts can also mess you up in terms of getting the special move when you want it to. And I think this is actually good sometimes, because this essentially makes it more lenient of how the game is going to register your input. For example, you might know the notorious down back forward motion that some characters have for throws. Down back forward gives you a throw on a lot of characters in previous NRS games, and some characters have it here like Kano, I believe. It just makes that input a little bit easier. Like, the game will accept the weird combobulated jumbled inputs that you have on the side. And if it recognizes the fact that, oh, you got a down, you got a back, and you got a forward within a certain amount of time, the game will actually give it to you. It'll be like, oh, you got that, so here you go. The problem with that is that sometimes if you're moving your character around back and forward, you might accidentally get an attack. And this is the same thing that boiled down to that Kung Lao thing that I had earlier, where I was getting accidental spins all the time with Kung Lao. I was like crouching and then walking forward, and I wanted to press forward 1, which is his good neutral punch button. And I would accidentally get spin all the time. That's because my input shortcuts was on. The game is recognizing that, oh, you press down, and then a little bit later, you press forward, we're gonna give you spin. No, that's not what I want at all. So we went back and figured out, why I had this on initially for a lot of characters and I thought it was okay. I turned it off after that, and I've actually gotten used to it being off, so I'm kind of okay. This is one of those things where if you're having issues with the fact that your alternate control is on, you might want to turn input shortcuts on as well to make it accept things a little bit easier. In my personal opinion, this is one you might want to mess around with a little bit. And then sometimes if you're like, yo, why am I getting this special move every once in a while? It might be input shortcuts. So this one up here is, more importantly, for canceling into moves. This one is for the move itself. And does that move get registered by the game? So these complement each other very much. Input shortcuts and input window timing, these can complement each other a lot. So you might want to mess around with short to medium to long, as well as the shortcut itself and the game accepting, did you mean to do that special move? This was a big thing when Street Fighter 4 came out, when most stuff like Shoryukens and fireballs and everything like that, double fireballs were a lot easier to do. And it sort of carries on that tradition. So I don't mind it as long as the system makes sense. Anyway, so this, I believe, is when you want to have some of your other quick buttons. So for example, throw, block, I think it's specifically throw, interact, and I'm not too sure if flip stance has an input shortcut, but throw is square and X. And then opposite throw is triangle and circle. You can disable that if you want. You can actually tell the game to, oh, I don't want to have to worry about pressing these buttons and accidentally getting a throw. Flip stance is 3 and 4. Well, there you go. So flip stance is X and circle. And if you accidentally press those two buttons at the same time, you're going to get flip stance when you don't want to. That's a big negative bueness. So in case you're always throwing with R1 or you're always throwing with one of these buttons on the top, there's no real need to have this. Like, maybe there's some sweet tech thing in the near future that this might be really good on. But yeah, no, flip stance does do things in this game. It's used for wake up attacks and shit like that. So yeah, flip stance, they integrate it into the game itself, but they really didn't need to. They could have put that on block. I don't know why they did it that way. So yeah, I think that is a good point. Alternate controls are mostly for people with arcade sticks. This would be very helpful with people with arcade sticks. And I generally sort of keep these on as well. So for the majority of what I play, this is about what it looks like. But in some situations, I'll probably be turning this off, and I'll probably be turning this off. These are the two that I change the most right here. And if I'm learning a new character, I'll probably turn crushing blow held check to off, so that if I'm learning that character, I can get random crushing blows off throws and stuff that I forget about every once in a while, which helps out a little bit. So those are that's the control scheme I use. That is the controller I use and why I use it. And that is what I've been sort of consistently using ever since Mortal Kombat X, when I first really got into these games, or Injustice 1. I remember messing around with alternate controls for a long time in Injustice 1. It just made everything harder. It felt really difficult to do even the most basic stuff. So I wouldn't recommend that. I think it's just easier to not have it. And hopefully some of that stuff, if you mess around with it, will make the game a bit easier to play.